Okay, we should be set.
Okay, I'll call to order the meeting of the Water Conservation Drought Management Advisory Board for the City of Moab at 2:03 p.m. here on December 8th, 2021. We don't have it in our minutes to read the written determination, but I think we'll need to again because we've returned to a virtual format. Is that correct, or do we need?
Actually, we are holding the meeting virtually, but we have the anchor location available for anyone of the public that would like to attend in person. And
okay.
For the electronic portions of our meeting, that complies with the requirements of the State Open and Public Meetings Act.
Great. So I will not read this thing then. Great.
You don't have to.
Then I won't. Okay, so we'll move on to approval of the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review minutes as they were sent around? Any further comments? I know, Arnie, you sent no comment, but compliment over. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I move to approve the minutes of the last meeting without changes.
Okay, do we have a second?
I will second.
Any further discussion?
Really good job.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Onto board and staff reports. We can begin with anyone who's inclined to share what they may have.
Well, I will if nobody else wants to go first.
Go ahead, Mike.
I did meet yesterday for about an hour with our new mayor, Joette, and Ronnie, whom you all know, of course, talking water stuff. And they seem to be I kind of led them through a guided tour of the last few decades and where we're headed on very top level stuff. And both of them are very much interested. So is Joette. I did tell them about the letter that we're going to present to council early next year, I presume, and how it outlined, our accomplishments, which Eve, thank you, all of you, and particularly to Eve for drafting the initial letter. It was great, and appreciate everybody else's additions as well. So that letter did that, went on to list suggestions for topics that council might wish us to pursue, and then of course ended by saying, you guys tell us what you'd like us to do. So that went over well. I did take the liberty, Mila, this particular applies to you. I mentioned how a recurring subject in water is stuff that's in the pipeline now, new residential developments, new commercial stuff, and so forth. And a number of people have asked, wanting to know how much new water is the city going to have to provide, and to what extent does that push us closer to a limit of how much we have. And of course, we can't answer that question, more on that later on. But I did offer to Joette I told her I need a project. Okay, now I'm going to be off council, and I offered to do all the legwork, the hard work, the number crunching, and so forth. And she seemed to be amenable to that, pleased to have free labor, kind of like a professor getting assigning work to a grad student and so on, and offered the notion that you might do two things: A, bless it all, check it all out when I'm done, and furthermore supply me with documentation and so forth. It could be anything from city water bills to data about how big new hotels, for example, are, and they're anything, whatever it takes in order to do a reasonably decent, accurate estimate of how much water a new hotel might use. And the same thing goes for residential developments as well. So I offered to take that on, so we give an idea of, in the next few years, we're looking at 100 acre feet, or we're looking at 1,000. Nobody knows what the answer is, but I offered to do that, and like I say, Joette seems to be happy to take me up on that offer. So I hope that didn't cross any lines for you. She went away. I guess I must have said the wrong thing.
Looks like she might have dropped off for a second. I'm sure she'll be back.
Okay. Anyway, that's all I got.
Thanks, Mike. Would anyone else like to add? No board. Chuck? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, Jeremy. I had promised Mike a kind of a little summary of the new well 12, and we met with our consultant this morning, Levi and I did, and went over what that would look like. And I'm hoping to have that within the next week and a half. I told you, Mike, I'd have it in December. I was hoping to have it earlier, but you know, doing some of the extra things that we did with the USGS and that kind of took a little longer. I'm not sure we'll have all that information in there, but we'll have it. I'll send it out to the water board and the city council. So just kind of that quick update, but we're almost done with it.
Thanks, Chuck. Anyone else for now?
Mike, you're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chuck. Yeah, don't wait too long because I'm wondering maybe summer, maybe, you know, at some point, presumably my city email account with all the many thousands of letters that are in there are going to disappear, including a lot of resources that I've had and so forth. So, so hopefully you can get it to me by the end of the year, and I'll save what I can.
You'll certainly have it by then.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm hoping it'll be next week, but it might be the following week. No later than that.
Okie dokie. Thank you.
Yep.
And Levi, Levi, you're there. I'm still after you to fix the sidewalk over there at First North. You know that. So
we're scheduled to do that this week with the moisture.
You've been. Yeah, well, I don't mean to be sarcastic or anything like that, but frankly, you've been telling me that for months now. So when you get it, and I know you.
Which sidewalk at First North? Because there's a couple out front of my house that have been sitting there unfixed for over 20 years.
We have an area on Main Street that's been secured and isolated because of a trip hazard, and have it on the list to have it repaired.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Levi. I don't mean to be too hard on you. I know you're busy, but I keep squeaking at you till it gets done. You know that. So. Yeah.
No, it's priority, and it's going to get done soon.
And by the way, yeah, while I got you and Chuck on the phone here, this is a side subject. The bridge over Pack Creek, the little one that you guys closed off. Did somebody mention in passing last night, Dave Sackerson, maybe it was, that it's no longer blocked? Did I hear that correctly?
So the bridge is still closed.
Okay.
However, it is still open to pass.
Well, I know the path is open, but if you can't get across the bridge, it doesn't do you any good.
You can get across the bridge with caution. So there's signs on both sides saying trail closed.
Okay, well, maybe that's what.
However, it's still passable if you use caution.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that later on. That's not a water thing. Thank you.
Technically, it's over water, but Arnie just joined us. If Arnie or anyone else has anything else they'd like to add to board and staff reports, coming in real sharp there, Arnie. Do you have anything you'd like to add for the time being? Can't hear you if you're talking.
I don't have anything to add at this point in time. I'm going to walk around here and find a little better location for myself, but I am here.
Thanks, Arnie. Okay, in lieu of anyone else having anything to add at this time, we'll move on to discussing the letter, which in some capacity we've all seen and or commented on. And this would be another opportunity to do so. If anyone has anything else to add at this time. And again, thanks to Eve for drafting and sharing around. Is there anything you'd like to add yourself, Eve?
Just a couple of layout, tiny things like in the header, if all those to, from, and date could be tabbed up to align, that helps me as your librarian. And then also there's a paragraph break that starts with in addition, that's after the second bullet point, that there should be a space there before that paragraph. Not sure if that's the kind of feedback you were looking for.
Oh, sure. Who at this point is taking on these final edits and the printing and deliverance of it, or is that on us to do and attend the meeting in January to do so? Or Mila, are you doing that?
No, I don't believe I have any part in this letter. I think this is
Okay.
from the board.
Okay, then I suppose it's up to us to make those edits. Eve, do you have this draft copy on you? And the one I'm looking at is the one that's posted on moabcity.org, which
Yeah,
some of that formatting might just be because of the fact that it's posted on the website. But
yeah. And is there were there any changes to it, Jeremy, that were sent directly to you since last week?
I don't believe so. I don't believe I received anything in the past week. I assume that this version that's posted to the website is the one that had made the rounds and then just was posted.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay.
Arnie, did you have any comments on this letter? I don't want to put you on the spot, but
So the only thing I thought that the intention of the letter was supposed to really try to engage the city council that we needed support from city staff, and I'm not sure that I actually got that as the main emphasis of that letter. But other than that, I don't really have any comments on it at all. I thought you guys did a great job with what you had out there.
do you think that the that second to the last paragraph that starts with essential should just be moved up really close to the top of the letter? Because that's where we talk about resources.
I thought if you wanted to make a point, I would have put it at the top of the letter. Yes, Eve.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, my only other question here is just a reminder as to how we were going to deliver this, whether it was going to be at the first meeting of the new council or at their annual meeting, somehow getting on that agenda to present this letter. In other words, what was the determination on our next steps with this if we decided? I remember in January was the time frame.
Do Chuck or Mila, do you have any, or Levi, do you have any sense of what the board's, or some, or even what the council's agendas look like in the first meetings of the year? Or is there a one of those retreats scheduled yet?
We don't have a retreat scheduled. The first meeting in January is relatively open, but the second meeting, I mean, there are quite a few business items already on there, but the second meeting looks a little bit better. So that's just up to you.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Carly about it too, and she's thinking that those two meetings are pretty busy, but I think Summer's right, maybe the second meeting. And they will be scheduling the, I don't know if it's called a retreat anymore, Summer, but sometime in February is what I was told is the plan.
I don't think they call it the retreat anymore. It was visioning before, and it has several different names, but I'm not sure when they're planning to schedule that other than later in the year.
Yeah.
I guess my proposal would be to schedule as a workshop at the second meeting. Does that seem possible?
Since the mayor sets the agenda, I think it might be better to have that conversation a little later or earlier next year to see if she feels like it should be a workshop item or if it just needs the changing of the guards is going to happen. And so it just seems like that conversation needs to happen with the new mayor at the first of the year to determine what meeting is appropriate for it to show up on an agenda.
So, yeah, Eve, on that subject, if we wanted to talk about that subject at a workshop, I think that'd be great. I would not ask for a special workshop just to talk about water. You know, you could sandwich it in there for a 20, 30-minute period, whatever it takes, but not a whole hour. There's just too many things on council's agenda.
Right. Should we, so I guess I need a little refresher from you all on what our intention is to send this sort of like in advance, even potentially. I guess we wait until the new council is sworn in, but then we just send it to the council and mayor. And not as something that goes in the packet of a meeting as an agenda item, or do we just send it to them and then potentially send an abbreviated water facts glossary for the edification of the new council members that that explains those basic things about water rights and acre feet and all of that.
Well, Eve, if I may suggest, I mean, I'm just speaking for myself, I guess, but if you, assuming you do it at a workshop, if you can get in any supporting material and attachments that you have and get those into Summer early on, so that when the agenda typically comes out on a Thursday, she has those materials and she'll put links to them right in the packet. And that gives council members a chance to preview it before they actually sit down and look at them. That would be great.
Before we get too far into the technicalities of this, since the contents of this letter have not been discussed in public before, I think it would probably be a good idea if the board wouldn't mind discussing what's in this letter for the public so that we can actually have that discussion in this forum rather than behind the scenes.
Well, Mila, have you seen the draft letter that we're talking about?
Yes, it's in the packet. But the concepts and everything, just like in council meetings, we need to discuss the actual contents versus just having it as a letter there. I think it would be great if the board doesn't mind doing that just for a minute.
Yeah. Is there something in the letter that bothers you?
No. What do you mean?
Okay. Well,
I'm just talking about
sure.
from an open and public meeting standpoint.
Would somebody like to
we
break
don't-
down what's in the letter? Maybe Eve,
Yeah.
you drafted it initially, just, a quick summary point. And just briefly before that, maybe my recollection was the function of the letter more than anything else would be to engage with council, with the mayor, with city staff, present ourselves in such a way as still being here and wanting to collaborate and work more intimately with the incoming council than maybe has been done in the past. And so the idea of however we present it, whether it's in workshop or, a couple of us attending a meeting as an agenda item, the function of it seemed to be to say, we're here, we need to work with you if we're going to work at all on anything. But Eve, if you wouldn't mind, just laying what's in it for the public, all the people watching right now.
Yeah, it's an introduction to the new mayor and council and sort of a recap for the returning council members about the history of the Water Conservation Board and sort of the main accomplishments of the board over the last several years. It was formed in 2017. And then contributions that the water board has provided, including work on advocating for the forest management plan and the gray water and green infrastructure projects, and encouraging the city to hire a sustainability director and a water attorney and review the city's water rights, to work on hiring a consultant to help understand the city's water supply and the water's budget, and worked on some advocacy for code revisions regarding water conservation measures. And then on the list of things that are possible projects in the coming months and years is projects such as conservation techniques, education programs, and initiatives for the public, estimating water demand impacts and sanitary sewer capacity for forthcoming developments, as well as infill and ADU density increases and those impacts on the water supply, updating existing mathematical models by ensuring proper monitoring of spring flow and well levels to determine if and when our aquifers are being overdrawn, researching new water sources, and understanding how to delay implementation of new culinary water sources, including exploration of tighter conservation standards for new developments, incentives for existing users, reduction of residential and/or commercial development, and substitution of secondary, which is non-potable water, instead of culinary water for landscaping uses where not already implemented. And in particular, making sure that the city provides staff coordination and resource allocation to support the projects of the water board. How's that?
Great, thanks. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to this discussion, to make it a discussion? Okay, then.
I just wanted to add that Mila was correct. I wanted, and Eve, you asked me why I hadn't really commented on it. It's because we were basically having a meeting over that water board or that letter over the internet. And I was a little concerned that we weren't following the Open Public Meetings Act. So I kind of backed off on answering anything about it at all. But what you guys came up with sounds great to me.
It sounds like the next step would be after the first of the year, connect with the mayor and determine what the best window of opportunity would be to present. I could take that on, Eve, if you wanted to do it. Did you have a preference, Mila, if it's better coming from city staff? What do we feel the advisement is on that?
I think we'll talk to the mayor when we go through the first agenda meeting and see how she feels about workshops and, meeting time and all the rest of that. And we can reach out to the board probably separately via email. Is there a meeting? Are we planning a meeting in January? Because I think some positions are up, right?
I think we should use January as our first meeting month of the year. So let's plan on maybe, well, when would our meeting time then be? Would be the second week or second Wednesday?
Yeah, it would be, I'll see where it lines up with the council meetings. So it would be January 12th.
Okay.
And the first council meeting would be on the 11th, I think. Summer, is that right?
Yes, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so the first water board meeting would be after the very first council meeting.
Okay.
So I think by that time we would have already had a chance to meet with Joette and chat with her about her how she wants to work that.
Okay, so when you and I check in about maybe a week or so in advance of that meeting, the first week of January, about what we're going to do at our meeting, maybe we can check in then to see where things are at with in terms of what you have or haven't talked to Joette about. So
sure,
I'll just plan on that for now. And if Eve, do you think you have an equivalent version to what's posted on the city website right now, to the point that you make those few adjustments and have a document that best represents grammatically and formatted what we want to present.
Yeah, and I'll move that one paragraph up a
Okay.
bit.
Oh, great. That sounds good. We'll circle back around to you then, knowing you'll have that when we know when we need to forward along, if that works.
Yeah, and the question I had from before is if we're planning to revise or simplify the water facts that I think would be a really helpful attachment to this. And I know that Arnie had talked
Jeremy,
about it. Yeah.
Arnie?
I volunteered to do that. I said it would be sometime in January when I would get it to you, and I'm still planning on making that happen.
Okay, great.
And I do have an AmeriCorps Vista that will be starting in the middle-ish, I think the 18th or 19th of January. And I was thinking that one of his first projects would be designing a new document like that, a new, in whatever format we decide is best.
I like that idea a lot, Mila. I think we talked a little bit about how we could make it better looking, and my job was not necessarily to make it more appealing in terms of its formatting. My job was to update the numbers based on the new water conservation documents that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then I can have him do the graphic design for us.
Thank you.
Okay, that sounds good. Anything else on the topic of the board letter? If not, pause. Eve, yes?
Yeah, I just want to make absolutely clear that I was really paying attention to those open meeting laws. And I never sent the letter except at the very end without any further action requested on the part of the board. There were no group discussions of the letter. All of the comments that I received were individually sent to me by individual members of the board.
Great. Okay. Our next item is the Water Now presentation regarding gray water and landscaping.
Yeah, so they were originally, we thought that we'd try to get in touch with them and see if they can start a little bit earlier. But otherwise, we'll just have to wait a minute.
I don't have anybody in the waiting room, Mila. I can't remember who was in there, but they left.
Are we, just to clarify then, are we taking a moment to reach out to those folks? I couldn't quite hear what you said, Mila. You're cutting in and out. Looks like you're on an old-timey phone. Okay. For the sake of filling space, with the notion that we are going to have a January a meeting ahead of us, with the idea being that it'll center around presenting the letter to the city. Is there anything else that anyone else would like to see discussed or addressed, or topic of interest for the first meeting of 2022? And if you can't think of anything now, feel free to send it my way. Yeah, go ahead, Arnie. Yep.
I thought we would, we have a couple of board members whose terms are expiring this year, and the replacement of Mike by the city council. How's that going to work? Do we have any board members that are leaving us or their terms expiring?
Well, if I
Does
may,
anybody know the answer to that?
Go ahead, Mike. I'll look online in the meantime.
I have it pulled up. I have Jeremy that your term expires the end of this year.
So I think the other folks may be in a holiday party until 3, which is when they were planning on joining us. So if we have any other business, we could talk about that. And otherwise, I don't know if we could take a break until they can join us at 3.
we're just chatting briefly now about terms and who's
Or
our
I
expiring.
can't hear you.
Oh, can anyone else hear me? No?
I can hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now, Mila?
Oh, there we go.
We're just talking about terms and their expiration dates. So we'll go into that for a minute, and maybe if we're done at 2:45, we'll take a 15-minute break and circle back around.
Cool. Sorry, my internet keeps getting a little bit funky, so I can't hear people for a second, but
I
I'll,
think-
I'll let you know if they can come on any earlier, but I think for now, we'll probably have to plan on that.
Okay. Summer, what were you saying about term expirations?
Yep.
You mentioning
Sorry.
me expired.
So Jeremy, I have that your term expires December 31st, 2021. Mike Duncan's term expires December 31st, 2021, and Kyle Bailey's term expires December 31st, 2021.
Okay. And Mike, your intention is to continue with the board or step off the board at that point as you'll also be stepping off council? I know you might have mentioned this at one point, but I'm forgetting now.
Well, what I told Ronnie and Joette yesterday was I would like to continue on the board,
Okay.
not as a city's liaison, obviously, and who that person will be is TBD. Same thing goes, by the way, for I'm a city's liaison on the GWISA board as well. That one is a little less. Well, the two boards, the city's water board is, I think I serve a more useful purpose there. Occasionally on the GWISA board, I'll contribute, but for the most part, I just kind of really rubber stamp what those guys do. So it's to be determined then who might, if anybody, will be my replacement on the GWISA board. I can tell you that the county councils, county commission they are now, their rep has, over the 3-4 years I've been doing this now, they've had several people come and go. So I don't think it's terribly interesting. Now, right now, they've had Trish Hedden has been in, and then Sarah Stocks did it for a while, blah, blah, blah. So did Gabe, whatever Gabe's last name is, and so
Okay.
forth. So they're not, I don't know what they're going to do, but that's where that stands.
Okay. And so then it's up to the new council, I assume, and at some point when they meet to determine and assign a new member to join us. So we'll maybe have a
Correct.
little bit of a gap there.
Yeah.
potentially.
Ronnie, the only other thing I'll add is Ronnie is that she's of all the council members, she's shown more interest in it than everybody else. The only problem with Ronnie is, you guys know, she's already over her head and activities and so forth. So I don't know what they're going to do.
And I can't recall, can anyone else identify whether Kyle was intending to continue to serve or if this was going to be it for him at the end of this year? I haven't spoken to him in a little while. I can reach out. No. Okay. I'll reach out to him. Okay. So yeah, we will have just as the point of the discussion being, we will have a January meeting on the 12th. If anyone has any particular agenda items other than what we've been discussing that you'd like to discuss, just please send them my way or Mila's way or both of our way in the next couple of weeks. Beyond that, if anyone else has anything you'd like to discuss at this time, great. Otherwise, we can take a short break before our presentation. And I'll stay on board here. I'll probably turn my video off, but
Stand by one moment.
They did say that they could be here at 2:45, if that's helpful. So
Great.
a little bit earlier than 3.
Okay. Anyone else have anything for the time being? Otherwise, we'll take a 8-minute break. Okay. Do as you will. We'll be here.
That'll give me time to get my headphones. Thanks, Jeremy.
Okay,
I'll
see
be
you.
right back.
Okay, we're back to recording. Just waiting for a couple folks to return here. And then we'll turn it over to our presentation. Summer, are we good to go logistically?
Yeah, we should be. Mila just said she was having some internet, there she is, some internet issues, so.
Great.
Yeah, we can go ahead if we're ready. Although I think there's two other folks from Water Now that are going to be, or Western Resource Advocates that are going to be joining us, I think. But Victoria, maybe you have an update on that.
Let me check really quick. I think we're just waiting on Lindsey.
Lindsay just popped in.
Oh, great. Yep. She should be the only one that we're waiting on then.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I can do just a really quick introduction or background, I guess, if that's all right, Jeremy.
Great. Yep.
So this is the effort for which the city got funding about 6 months ago or so to get some technical assistance in helping us develop our water-wise landscaping regulations that will hopefully be tied into gray water as well. And we are working with these folks at Western Resource Advocates and Water Now Alliance. They're helping us do all the background research and figure out the best path forward. They've come up with some really interesting ideas so far. So I'm excited to have them present to you guys and let you know what we've been talking about. We're looking forward to probably having some kind of, land use code update proposal February, I would say, at which point we'll be able to refine our ideas and, take it to the next step. So most of that background.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, Mila. I'll go ahead and share my screen. We have a few slides to go over with you all today. Let's see. Oh, sorry. 1 second. Wrong screen. Stop one. There we go. All right, can you guys see my presentation? Okay,
Yep.
Great. Thanks. There. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for having us today. My name is Victoria Arling, and I'm the Colorado Basin Program Manager with Water Now Alliance. I'm joined by my colleague, Lindsey Rogers, who's a water policy analyst for Western Resource Advocates. And as Mila said, we've been working with her over the last few months through Water Now's Project Accelerator program, and we're really excited to chat with all of you today about this project to develop some water-wise landscaping ordinances for the city. And so today we'll just do a quick round of introductions, followed by some project background, an overview of some potential landscape ordinance options, and then finally we have some time for questions and discussion at the end. Yep, so maybe we could just do a quick round of introductions. Maybe feel free to share your name, a bit about yourself, such as your professional background or history in Moab, your involvement with the water board, really anything else you'd like to share. I'll start. Again, my name is Victoria, and I'm the Colorado Basin Program Manager with Water Now Alliance. I'm based out of Boulder, Colorado, and my professional background is in water resource management and land use planning. Maybe I'll turn it over to Lindsey next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsey Rogers. I'm a water policy analyst with Western Resource Advocates. And my work is really focused on urban water conservation policies and program support, as well as the integration of water and land use planning, which we'll be talking more with you all about today. I'm based in Denver, Colorado.
Great. Thanks, Lindsey. Let's see. It's not showing me names. Maybe if you guys don't mind just hopping in and going next, that would be great.
Jeremy, you first.
Thanks, Arnie. I'm Jeremy Lynch, currently serving as board chair for the Water Conservation Drought Management Advisory Board. I work as well in conservation currently now on a statewide scale for an organization here in Utah. And I have an interest in and have worked variously in small scale water harvesting as a strategy in the desert Southwest. How about you, Arnie?
I am the vice chair of this board, at least until January. And I've been working in water resources now for 35 years because I'm really, really old. And I am the watershed coordinator for Grand and Soundwater County, which is run through a grant through Utah Division of Quality. That's probably enough. Cara?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, you've passed it on to me. My name is Cara Dornwind. I've lived in Moab since the early 1990s. I served on the Planning Commission from 2000 to 2010. My formal education is in landscape architecture and city planning. And then I've worked with all manner of native plant restoration and riparian areas and water projects around the area. And it's most of the time that I've lived in Moab. And I pass it to Eve.
I'm Eve. I'm probably the newest member of the board, but for a few years I was the secretary to the board. And my education and training is in libraries, and I was a library administrator, worked in libraries for 27 years. And so I'm kind of the English major on the board. Mike?
Yeah, thank you. You there, Mike?
Oh, yeah, I'm there. I thought you were doing it. Am I up? Yeah, I'm Mike Duncan. I'm a retired engineer, the grandfather on the board. I'm nearing the end of my one and only 4-year term. What else I want to say here? I guess that's about it. That's all I can think of right now.
Steve, would you go ahead? Oh, you're muted.
I'm a retired environmental chemist. I had a laboratory in Salt Lake for 20 some odd years. I grew up in Southern Colorado on a ranch. My family's been dealing with water issues for 3 generations now. And I have learned a lot from my father and grandfather about aquifers and stream flows and things like that. So I have a very intense interest in water.
Any staff that would like to jump in? Then we'll move on.
Great. Well, thank you all. It's really nice to meet all of you. We've heard a lot of great things about the water board from Mila over the last few months, so it's finally nice to put some faces to the names. And so I'll just give a little background about mine and Lindsey's organizations, but Water Now is a nonprofit network of local water leaders supporting sustainable, affordable, equitable, and climate resilient water solutions in their communities. And so as the Colorado Basin Program Manager at Water Now, my role really focuses on executing projects and different policy initiatives throughout Colorado and the River Basin, including leading up our Colorado project accelerators.
All right, Western Resource Advocate. So we're a conservation organization. We've been working in the Intermountain West, as you can see on this map, for about 30 years in the water, air, and land policy space, all with the goal of mitigating and building resilience to climate change. I've been with the team for about 6 months and was formerly with Water Now Alliance. Our two organizations work very closely on a variety of projects together. And our Healthy Rivers team, which is our water branch, is very focused and has a lot of expertise in the urban water conservation space, as I mentioned.
And so Project Accelerator is Water Now's program to help cities, water agencies, and other organizations jumpstart their sustainable water projects. Through this program, we provide 250 hours of pro bono program and technical assistance over about a 6 to 9 month period. And this summer, the city of Moab applied and was selected to receive support from both Water Now and Western Resource Advocates to develop updated water efficient landscape ordinances and associated gray water reuse and rainwater capture guidance. And so as hopefully you've seen in the project brief that Mila shared, and if you haven't seen that yet, I'm happy to send that along. We've been working with the city to research water-wise landscaping, irrigation and gray water best practices, conduct widespread stakeholder engagement, draft landscape irrigation standards, and ultimately finalize and pass an updated landscaping code through the city council. So this project kicked off late this summer, where we compiled and reviewed Moab's current planning documents to gain a better understanding of the community's integrated water and land use planning efforts and actions. Throughout this past fall, we've conducted research on various communities' water efficient landscape ordinances in Utah and across the West to create a database of landscape best practices to reference throughout this project. Today, Lindsey will be sharing some of that research and highlighting some potential examples that Moab could use in their own ordinance updates. Additionally, we also reviewed Utah's gray water reuse regulations for landscape irrigation and spoke to a variety of gray water reuse professionals in the state. Right now, we're currently in our stakeholder engagement phase, where we intend to engage through meetings or events like today with relevant stakeholders to gain feedback and insight into proposed water-wise landscaping best management practices and potential gray water and rainwater code updates. As you know, today is the first time we're engaging with the water board, and we're really looking forward to additional engagement opportunities with all of you in the spring. And so come next spring, we plan to draft landscaping code updates with the goals of finalizing those updates in the early summer. And finally, come June, we'll provide a final report to the city documenting the process, lessons learned, challenges, and other important project components. And just briefly, some goals that we've identified for this project include to meet or exceed the state's regional water conservation goal of 25% reductions in water use by 2030 by increasing Moab's resiliency to drought through water conservation and boosting outreach and education. This project also aligns with many of those identified priorities and goals in Moab's conservation plan update. We've also identified some potential implementation challenges or barriers that we could face throughout this project in regards to passing this updated landscape ordinances, including, limited staff resources and enforcement capacity, green industry capacity, preferences and expertise, and also political will. And so we plan to keep these potential roadblocks and barriers in mind as we draft and develop these ordinances and recommendations. And so, as I mentioned, we recently conducted research on communities in Utah and across the West that have exemplary water efficient landscape ordinances and/or communities that are similar demographic, economic, and climate characteristics to Moab. Some of the codes and regulations we researched include plant material, landscape criteria, water budgets, maintenance, and more, as you can see on the slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsey to discuss some of the landscaping standard options we identified that could be included in Moab's landscaping code updates.
Excellent. Thanks, Victoria. All right. So today we're going to walk you all through 12 separate options or opportunities for amending Moab's landscaping standards. And these standards, as Victoria mentioned, are based on that research from those 9 Western communities. as well as sort of consultation with Mila, who gave us some guidance on how to initially sort of hone in on recommendations that might be a good fit for the city. So we're going to share for each option or opportunity a little bit of context for why this could be a good potential option, what Moab's current zoning code says or doesn't say about the standard, and then some examples of potential modifications based on standards used in those other communities. So I do want to note that these are not our final recommendations. This is really a list of options that will be further honed and also added to or subtracted to based on our stakeholder engagement, like what we're doing with you all here today. Next slide, thank you. So I'd like you all to keep that in mind as we walk through the standards, because at the end, I hope we have time, 15 minutes or so, for discussion and to get your input on these questions listed here. So anything in the list that's jumping out to you that you think we should really be prioritizing, options that you think you wouldn't support for Moab's updated landscaping code for whatever reason, anything that we might be missing that you'd like to see considered. And then you'll see in some of the examples that we provide language that is worded as a best practice or recommendation versus language that's more strongly and strictly a requirement. So we'd like to have a conversation with you all about whether you'd like to see a real emphasis and focus on requirements, or you're open to those softer best practices recommendations in here as well. Next slide, thank you. Okay, so we'll kick it off with minimum and maximum living plant requirements. This is an interesting one because it's not maybe the most relevant to water efficiency. You know, there's potential, and if you have a water savings benefit if you include a maximum to living plant materials. But a living plant material minimum standard can also be important for our landscaping aesthetics and reduced heat island effect, pollinator habitat, all of those other important things that come along with a healthy biodiverse landscape. So currently at the residential scale, there is no living plant material requirement in Moab. There is, however, a general landscaping requirement of 70% for front and side yards. For developments over 30,000 square feet, so we're thinking like large commercial hotels, that type of thing. Some of the staff and Mila on the line might have a better understanding of exactly where this shows up, what types of properties this is referring to in the zoning code. But this is at least 5% living plant material other than ground cover or natural vegetation, and no more than 80% living ground cover. So they have those two sort of parameters. A couple of examples here that we're seeing in other states. So Aurora, Colorado, pretty straightforward, 50% minimum living materials once a landscape is established. Grand Junction, Colorado, this is really focused on highly visible spaces, but they're looking for 70% of the area to be live vegetation for those street frontage landscapes, buffers, and parking lot perimeter landscapes. Just something for the city to keep in mind as a potential adjustment. Next slide. So then on the flip side, oftentimes what we see is this percentage minimum or maximum for non-living permeable ground cover. So, here we want to try to find some balance between living plant material, but also allowing for a greater percentage of non-living ground cover, which could potentially have the effect of reducing landscape water demand. So no standard in the current zoning code for residential development, but again, in those larger developments, permeable non-living ground cover shall have a maximum coverage of 20%. So potentially a little bit lower here than what we see in some other communities. Aurora here again keeps it really simple. So they have that 50% living plant requirement, 50% non-living material requirement. This includes a wide variety of things: river rock, crushed rock, organic mulches, bark, gravel, cobblestones, anything that basically could be considered a part of your landscape, excluding sort of hardscape like a driveway, for example. That would not be included in the 50%. And then Thornton's is a bit lower. They're looking for up to 25% of the area to be landscaped in mulch, pavers, decorative concrete. Next slide, thank you. Okay, turf limits, lots of information on here. And that's because this is potentially one of the most important standards that we have to actually reduce landscape water demand. As I'm sure you all know, traditional lawn and sod grass is used a lot in our landscapes, and it's an incredibly thirsty, high water use crop. So we're seeing a lot of momentum around our western states at reducing the amount of turf that's installed in new landscapes and removing turf that's in place. So Moab currently has a very strong turf-related standards on those large developments. So first, there's turf areas should be limited to areas with suitable shade, less evaporation, less water use needed in those areas. It shall not be allowed in spaces narrower than 10 feet. This is an irrigation efficiency issue. It's really hard to run a sprinkler system in narrow areas effectively without overspray. And then turf shall not be used in more than 10% of total landscape area, and it should be located in places where people will use it. So that usability function comes up a lot in the different standards that we see. And, basically that's saying this is recreation, or my kids play on it, my dogs play on it. It's not areas of turf where the only person interacting with the turf or using it in any way is the person mowing and maintaining that lawn, right? So one potential modification here, what could be to very simply take the current standards and adopt those for all development types. I mean, as you'll see in these examples, this is a very strong current standard that the city has in place. Sedona's is similar. They're saying, lawn or turf area shall not exceed 10% of the overall landscape area. That's for all development types. In Henderson, Nevada, they actually prohibit any new turf in residential front yards. And it's also not an allowable plant material within public or private common open spaces unless it meets the definition of how they're referring to usable. So what they're saying as examples of non-usable is, medians, streetscapes, parking lot, entryways, things where you really couldn't use this for recreation or any sort of real function. In Sacramento, turf is not allowed on slopes greater than 25% when oriented towards hardscape. Again, that's really getting at this irrigation efficiency challenge to irrigate effectively on slopes and then avoid runoff into that hardscape. And then Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District has a model water efficient landscape ordinance that some of its retail agencies have adopted over the last couple of years. And they have an interesting language in there that says that any HOA governing documents are void and unenforceable if they require the use of turf. And I didn't include the whole code language here, but under certain circumstances. So if the landscape area is less than 8 feet wide, or it exceeds 35% of the landscaped area, or the HOA is prohibiting the use of water conserving plants as a group. So this is important because we want to make sure that whatever code it is adopted by the city, we ensure there aren't, HOA governing documents out there, or certain HOAs that are requiring more turf than what the city has decided upon.
Lindsey, quick question for you, if I may, before you go on.
Yeah, absolutely.
You used the word usable turf. I've been trained since I was a little baby to stay off the grass, basically. So, where people have lawns, you're supposed to use the sidewalks, Could you clarify what you mean by usable, particularly in a commercial context?
Yeah. I think there's different forms of usable turf, and there's also a lot of different words that people use to describe this. And in Nevada, for example, they say functional and non-functional. In Colorado, we've more moved towards the term non-essential and essential. But different reasons why turf would be usable. Some folks really might appreciate some turf grass in their backyard for, say, their dogs or their kids. Obviously, any kind of recreational activity, even if that's say picnicking in a park or all the way to a soccer field. What we want to move away from is exactly that, Mike. Those areas of turf where you were taught this is just to look at, and no one is interacting with it in any way besides the person who's, there applying the fertilizers and mowing it regularly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that helps. I guess the only qualms I have about it is, any area, it's one thing if one person walks across turf grass, it'll shrug it off, and particularly if it's well watered. If a lot of people do it, pretty soon there'll be a bare path worn through there, and the grass will be dead, and you'll see a dirt path through there. And I don't know. I'm not, the utility of that doesn't really grab me, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I would argue that if there's a lot of people just walking across a section of turf grass as a path to get somewhere, that's an area that shouldn't have turf. So that would be a non-functional use of turf. That should be an area that has, mulch or gravel or something. I think there's ways of maintaining turf grass for recreational purposes where you don't see that kind of impact.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Okay, so moving on to the flip side of this equation, our water-wise and native plants. Obviously really important in this discussion because they have a far lower water demand than turf grass and other high water use plants. And they serve so many other benefits that I'm sure, many of us are aware of, pollinator habitat, biodiversity, those types of community benefits. There are currently no standards for residential property requiring water-wise or native plants. We do see these standards come in these larger developments, and then in the RC resort commercial zone, which you all may have a better understanding of candidly than I do, but this is implemented through the Moab Grand Canyon North Gateway Plan. And the district is designed to create a positive first impression in the city of Moab and to encourage mixed residential and commercial development. So those two sort of zoning categories. So in those larger developments, this is specific to projects located at the interface between urban areas and natural open space. They're requiring non-irrigated, highly drought tolerant plants that will blend with the native vegetation and that are fire resistant. And then in the commercial, this RC resort commercial zone, there's a really more of a recommendation or a best practice to use locally appropriate shrubs, trees, and grasses or plants with low water demand characteristics in order to minimize the consumption of water. So a recognition of the importance here, but no firm requirement. So a couple of different options for modifications. One idea would be to adopt the current standards for the large developments to all development types in the wildland urban interface. This is a really strong best practice, both for water conservation and also fire resistance, which we know is important to the community. Sedona, Arizona has this approach of requiring a minimum of 50% of the plants on a development to be native species identified in their plant list in the administrative manual. Henderson, Nevada, they really take an approach here of trying to promote diversity of the species of their low water plants that are installed. So they're requiring a minimum of 3 tree varieties and 5 shrub varieties for each project, selected again from their plant list. And then Thornton has some sort of broader language around requiring water-wise landscaping on all development types in recognition of the semi-arid climate and limited amount of water available for outdoor use. And in their code, they just provide guidelines on, they're sort of broad, but important best practices on what water-wise landscaping means to the city. Moving right along. All right, so a plant list is typically used to encourage or require certain low water native plant species, and then to also categorize those plant species by their water use. In Moab, that resort commercial zone, they do have a plant list. It's only at this point for screening plants, which are typically used between properties or roads for privacy and sound barrier, that kind of thing. So some examples of modifications here. In Sedona, they approach this issue by having a required plant list that features plants that are considered water-wise or low water use plants unless they're listed as riparian, which is kind of interesting. So that plant list has 3 categories: native, adaptive, and riparian plants. And again, you know, as we saw on the last slide, they have to select 50% of those plants from this plant list that are native species, excuse me. And then in Castle Rock, they also have a required approved plant list that plant materials must be selected from. And they also add the stipulation that they need to meet the plant quality and species standards of the American Standard for Nursery Stock, which is a pretty standard best practice. And sorry to go back just for a second here. So I wanted to mention that for Moab, there's a couple of options here, so that the city could either decide to adopt and maintain its own recommended or required plant list, or if that felt, you know, potentially too onerous, the city could borrow from other communities or potentially a state maintained list. And we need to do a little more research on this, but we know that Utah State University, their Center for Water Efficient Landscaping, maintains some state lists. So in an ideal world, you know, we wouldn't want to reinvent the wheel. We'd be looking for plant species to include on that list.
Can I just toss in something real quick here? So in case you guys don't know, I've got a pretty extensive plant background in this area. And I will say that most lists that come from out of area miss the mark completely for Moab. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to derail your talk, but just to make sure you guys know that, you know, a lot of the lists that might come from Salt Lake or St. George, they really don't apply here. So it's lovely to think we can adopt a list from USU or something, but unless they've done one for our part of the Colorado Plateau, it will miss a lot of opportunities and also include a lot of not ideal plants. And then the last thing I'll say on this is I think also it's important to include some really clear information about plants to avoid, because there are some plants that are great to use, but I think you might know, like in Vegas and stuff, miscanthus and other plants, that they become noxious weeds in the environment around the cities. And with Moab being such a small place surrounded by public lands, that's a pretty important issue.
That is really helpful, Kara. Thank you. It sounds like then it would probably make sense for Moab to develop and maintain its own plant list, unless we're able to find something that's regionally appropriate.
Unfortunately, probably, and I'd be happy to lend a hand with that if that's
great.
helpful.
We will definitely take you up on that. All right, continuing on here. Okay, so hydrozones. Hydrozones are an important consideration here because they allow really for proper, efficient irrigation. A hydrozone means a grouping of plants in the landscape according to categories based on their water usage. So, for example, non-irrigated, water conserving, and non-water conserving. These are plants that are all on the same valve or set of valves with the same irrigation schedule. So the diagram here just explains this a little further for those who aren't familiar with the concept, but you basically putting your low, moderate, high water use plants together into groupings so that you can irrigate them effectively with, say, a sprinkler system for turf and drip irrigation for your trees and shrubs. So nothing on the residential side in Moab right now in the code. In that larger development category, there is some language that says with plants with similar water needs shall be grouped together as much as possible. Not quite sure if there's really a strong enforcement mechanism for what's listed in the code now. Some examples we've seen in other communities. So in Castle Rock, Colorado, again, they mentioned that plants should be hydrozoned with plants of a similar hydrozone. So low with very low, or excuse me, low with low, very low with very low. And then plants of a very low hydrozone are not to be planted in a moderate to high hydrozone. In Aurora, they divide, at least for all of their non-single family landscapes, you must be dividing your plant types into water conserving, non-water conserving, and non-irrigated areas like pavement. And then they sort of enforce this by requiring a separate hydrozone plan, which would be kind of a diagram like what's included on the slide, in their landscape plan submittal. Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, their model ordinance takes this a step further. They require that each valve shall irrigate a landscape with similar site, slope, and soil conditions and plant material with similar water needs. So getting into that hydrozone concept without using that term. And then they stipulate that turf and non-turf areas shall be irrigated separately. Drip emitters and sprinklers shall be placed on separate valves. So getting a little bit more into the irrigation requirements of those different hydrozones. The landscape water budget. So a landscape water budget is used to limit the overall amount of water that can be applied to the landscape during a given irrigation season. So right now in Moab, this isn't something that's being used in the zoning code. And there's sort of different approaches that communities have taken to the landscape water budget concept. So Aurora, they say that all of their landscape proposals need to calculate water demand of all the landscapable areas according to a water usage table. They want to see what the overall demand is of that landscape, but they're not necessarily putting a high level or a upper limit on it, at least at this point. They're more just getting a sense of the requirements of a new development. Sacramento takes it a step further, and they require water budget calculations that must include an estimated total water use that doesn't exceed the calculations for the site's maximum applied water allowance. And they provide all of those calculations and information. And so, let's say your total water use exceeds that maximum applied, then they're asking you to adjust your landscaping, adjust your irrigation to be within the maximum applied water allowance. Aspen uses a similar tactic to Sacramento, and they are requiring that the total irrigation water need for all hydrozones can't exceed a maximum applied water budget of 7.5 gallons per season per square foot of irrigated landscape area. That would be a very different number in Moab than in Aspen, just given the lengthier irrigation season and climate, but the concept could be applied. And the other interesting feature that they include here, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few slides, is if you include special features in your landscape, like green stormwater infrastructure, a rain barrel or a bioswale or a gray water reuse system, then they'll basically allow you to up that gallons per season to say like 8 or 8.5, and allow you more flexibility in what you use in your landscape. Okay, so soil amendment, things like compost or other types of organic amendments, has a lot of important benefits. There's some studies that suggest up to 20% water savings from effectively incorporating soil amendment. It can also support plant growth and can increase stormwater retention, suppress pests, and reduce the need for fertilizers. So very important best practice. We're not seeing any requirements in code currently. And I've only included one recommendation here from the city of Thornton, and that's because we're really seeing fairly consistent industry best practice around how much soil amendment to incorporate. So it's listed here, a minimum 4 cubic yards of organic matter, soil amendment required for turf, trees, shrubs, perennials, and annuals that shall be tilled to a minimum depth of 6 inches.
Can I ask a question on this one?
Please.
Is this really is this being done in high desert environments, or is this being done in places that have actual, like, we only get 6 to 10 inches of rain a year. And so just having a long history and a lot of expertise with getting plants established in this area, if you're really trying to go for drought tolerant plants, this actually could kill some of them for our area. If you're going with native plants, it's actually not ideal. So I just wanted to toss that out there. Again, I don't want to derail your presentation, but I think there's some things to be aware of here of how you might put something like this, because it also could become something that it's also very expensive to get organic matter soil amendment in our area. because of shipping and stuff. And so it also could be something that could become prohibitive for some situations. So I just wanted to toss those two thoughts out there on this particular topic for our region.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kara. We'll go back in our research to see if Sedona or Grand Junction, which I think are more similar than some of the other communities we looked at, have soil amendment requirements. And I'm just remembering, and I don't have the database in front of me, but I'm remembering potentially some differences in the amount of soil amendment recommended in various codes for native grasses.
Right. And I would say, if you're doing true turf, that's one thing. But if you're doing native grasses or a native landscape that you're trying to truly revegetate, another place to look might be like Reno area, might be because that's somewhat similar to here as far as water and temperatures. But again, I don't want to derail you. I just wanted to toss out some feedback.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. We'll definitely follow up on that one. And can move on. Thank you. So mulch it's sort of similar to soil amendment. It's helps to retain water, reduce soil evaporation, maintain soil temperatures. We're not seeing any requirements for mulch in Moab at this time, but again, you kind of see somewhat consistent recommendations between the communities for different types of mulches. So in Castle Rock, they're recommending organic mulch applied at a depth of 4 inches, 1 cubic yard per 80 square feet, and then organic mulch applied at a depth, inorganic mulch, so rock, gravel, applied at a depth of 2 inches. Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, some fairly similar. After completion of the planting, all irrigated non-turf areas shall be covered with a minimum 3 to 4 inch layer of mulch. Non-porous material shall not be placed under that mulch.
And the only thing, sorry, I'm going to jump in again here, but the only thing I would toss out on this topic is it would be nice if, I think mulch is fabulous, especially in urban landscapes. And it's actually, I think, more important than amending the soil in some areas. But I think for our area, there's interest in actually using biocrust as a part of how some people do their landscaping. And so mulch will kill biocrust. So making sure if you do something like this, you leave space for being able to do something if you're truly wanting to restore a more native plant community and it's truly dry. That's maybe not really applicable in most of the city limits, but it may be in a few areas.
Right, so some kind of exception for folks going that route. Great. Okay. Okay, so then we get into irrigation system criteria. This is important because, even the most water-wise landscaping won't save you any water if you're not irrigating it effectively and efficiently. So Moab's got some standards in place that for those larger properties, they require a detailed irrigation plan with system layout and all the components. And then in that resort commercial zone, all required landscaped areas shall include a permanent underground irrigation system. Those permanent systems potentially could save you water compared to hand watering. I think the jury is out on that. And more importantly, they help to, make sure that we establish and maintain a healthy landscape. So we see that come up in some of the different example code language here. So Aurora, Colorado, they are requiring applicants to provide automatic irrigation systems for landscaped areas. They also are requiring that applicants install automatic rain shutoff sensors to all their controllers in all irrigation systems. So that's those rain sensors, really, as the name suggests, they pick up on any kind of precipitation and then they postpone an irrigation cycle until more irrigation is needed after that rain event. In Thornton, Colorado, they're requiring an irrigation construction plan that graphically depicts an efficient irrigation design. Each irrigation zone on the construction plan is designed to water plants with similar water and environmental requirements. So again, getting into that hydrozoning opportunity here, and they really want to see this graphically depicted so that folks can review it. Jordan Valley, they require that landscaped areas are provided with a EPA WaterSense labeled smart irrigation controller. which automatically adjusts in response to changing weather conditions. So recognizes when there's going to be precipitation events or wind, or when they need to adjust the cycle automatically. So this is another strong opportunity for water savings in irrigation. Okay, moving on to gray water reuse, which we know is a particular interest of the city.
Can I kind of interrupt for a second, Lindsay?
Sure.
Before you move on to gray water reuse, we were talking about landscaping ordinances. Now we're kind of moving to a different solutions or opportunities you're pursuing here. How do they relate to people who would like to have vegetable gardens?
The irrigation system criteria?
Did you hear me?
I think he's talking about all things.
Gardens. Yeah. All everything of the above dealt with landscaping requirements, and I'm wondering where vegetable gardens fit into that in terms of how much water you can use. One of them said 7.5 gallons per square foot or whatever it was. And the hydrozoning thing, obviously, it works out very well with gardens, but there's a lot of people with gardens, and it's a very popular activity in Moab. How does that fit in with some of the discussions you've had in the last 10, 15 slides when you're dealing with landscaping?
That's a really interesting question that we haven't specifically been thinking about or talking about yet. But, my thought is that we certainly don't want to preclude or limit anyone who wants to have a robust vegetable garden, right? My guess, and this depends on the crop, is that the water use of most vegetables that we're planting fall in sort of that medium hydrozone category. So I think, if we, for example, went the landscape water budget route and we set a maximum for a landscape, we would want to do the calculation and make sure that, just for an example, say like 75% of a landscaped area could be covered in a vegetable garden without going over that total maximum allotted. But the other option is to provide an exception in the code that says, vegetable gardens, because they have so much other community benefit beyond turf, for example, will be allowed to have a higher maximum allotted water usage.
I'm not bringing it up because I'm trying to criticize what you're saying. What I'm bringing it up for is to keep that in the back of your mind when you're developing these landscaping ordinances, that vegetable gardens are very important to the community of Moab. Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because we hadn't considered that yet, and it's not something that I've seen called out explicitly in code very often. I'm not sure why, but it sounds like we will want to include that in the code in some way and make sure that the new standards aren't affecting the ability of folks to have their vegetable gardens.
You are definitely going to want to include that for Moab, I think.
That's great. Victoria and I are actually working on a separate project in Colorado around the potential water savings associated with urban agriculture. And we're very interested in seeing vegetable gardens flourishing in the West. Okay, I think we can move on to gray water. Okay, great. So we know this is a particular interest and something that this group has talked about, something that Mila was really interested in getting our support on. So we kind of initially just did some digging and got our head around what the Utah's statutes say about gray water systems. As most of you probably know, gray water systems are allowed in Grand County per the state statute. However, there's no sort of requirement or incentive at this time to encourage them. We're aware of, I believe, 5 or 6 systems that have been installed over the last year or two in Moab. So there's a couple ways we could go about this. We can go with some kind of incentive or requirement for gray water in all or some types of new development. So we're at the very beginning stages of thinking through this, but a couple ideas that have come up could be a reduction on your wastewater bill. Obviously, if you're directing your gray water from your sink and your shower head and your laundry machine to your landscape, it's not going into the centralized wastewater treatment plant. Your gray water could also be included in a landscape water budget allowance, which is something we talked about in a few slides back. So let's say, you know, again, to use Aspen as example, most landscapes have 7.5 gallons per square foot per season. Maybe you install a gray water system and you up your allowance to 8.5 square feet per season, or per square foot per season, excuse me. The other opportunity here would be to really take it a step further and require fully installed gray water systems in all, or most likely some types of new development. We did talk with some of the gray water experts in the community that Victoria mentioned about an opportunity for a stub out, which would basically look like some kind of dual plumbing indoors in a new home or some kind of development, without going so far as to require that all the landscaping for gray water is completed. That was not a popular idea with the health department or with really any of the folks that we connected with about this. They didn't think that it would end up being utilized in most cases. So if we were to, you know, go the route of including a code requirement for some types of new development, they would want to see that those fully installed systems that have both the indoor plumbing and the landscaping installed. The other opportunity here in the landscaping standards is to include some kind of best practices around how to ensure that the landscaping that is installed is gray water compatible. And this we would primarily be taking from the state statute language, which has a lot of these standards in place. But, you know, what are the soil characteristics? How do we design the subsurface irrigation system? What does the mulch basin design look like? Just for example, so that folks that are installing landscapes, you know, that may be converted and used for gray water in the future, or that we're having a requirement for gray water, are installing them correctly and appropriately, and they won't have to go back and retrofit that later on. And I think this is our last.
I have a question.
Sure.
I have a question for you. Is the next one? Yeah, let's talk about gray water for a minute, if you don't mind. My connection is relatively unstable, like Mila's is right now, and I missed half of what you just said there, Lindsay. I'm assuming that you've spoken with Orion and Southeastern Utah Health Department on the gray water practices that are currently happening here in Moab. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and we're running into a few barriers in terms of moving forward with gray water. One of them is, you are correct that the had a high density standard out there that would require a set of houses in new developments have gray water, but has been nullified by the county at this point in time. We do have in the county, the one high density development going in that is trying to put in gray water in a certain percentage, and some of the lots are so small that they can't actually make it work, so to speak. And we have fittings work. I've been a proponent of gray water for a little while. At first, when we did get Utah's regulations updated so it made it possible to even install gray water in Grand County, we discussed requiring the every new residential home to be stubbed out in gray water. Since then, I'm assuming your discussions with Orion and perhaps the county have gone to the point we have to be permitted. That's part of the requirement at this point in time with Utah. So the Southeast Utah Health Department will have to permit anything that is used. And if we just stub it out, we end up with people who will be using it after the development's been completed and never bothered to get the permit and or have knowledge about how to actually use it, which could become a problem from a health department standpoint. And I'm just kind of throwing that out there to let some of the other board members know that these discussions have been going on with some of the issues associated with using gray water. I'm still a big proponent for gray water, and I still would like to see it go forward. I'm not sure it's going to work if we don't require a fully installed rainwater harvesting, or excuse me, fully restored gray water use system that is permitted by the state with every new development. There's just, it seems like a fair number of officials are concerned about the, not illegal use, but the inappropriate use of gray water without a permit. And I'm not sure how to incentivize that or make that happen. But it has been a discussion at this point in time in the community. I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks for that context, Arnie. Orion did mention to us the concern about stub outs from a permitting perspective, which is, why I wanted to mention it to you all, because some communities go that route of having the stub out requirements, and it really didn't feel like that was going to be a good fit for Moab. So really the question remains whether we want to take it so far as having a fully fledged system installation required in some or all types of new development. And I think this is something we're going to have to do some more digging on to see what other communities are doing, because that's candidly, I don't know of any communities that have that type of requirement in the West at this time. But we need to see if there are other opportunities here, or if there's a way we can implement that type of requirement.
Hey, Victoria, if I may interject as much. I remember, I don't mean to throw water on a fire, so to speak, but I remember, who am I trying to say? The USU gal who got her PhD rainwater harvesting. She did an analysis of rainwater harvesting, and where I'm headed here is that I'm not sure from a cost effectiveness point of view, it buys us much in our desert climate, because we don't get much rain. That's the bottom line on it all. And even if you could collect all the rainwater that fell, it struck me, because I remember going through some of the elementary math, and it just didn't amount to much compared to gray water sources or culinary water sources and so forth. So it struck me as a nice idea conceptually, but as a practical matter, did it really buy you much? And the answer is, nearly as I could tell, was not much.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd like to see that research if anyone's able to share it with me.
Well, I think part of what Mike's getting after, since we seem to have shifted to rainwater harvesting, is that it was only 6 to 10 inches of rain a year, and the average size of a roof in this area. You're not talking, and the fact that the state of Utah restricts how much you can actually put into a barrel. You're not, and if you want to grow fruit trees, for instance, you're really not getting much out of it. I think you get more out of the sort of things that Jeremy's worked on a lot over the years of actual grading your land in a way that it soaks into the ground. But if you're going to try to actually store it in a barrel and then use it, I don't know that you're getting massive value, especially for then the maintenance of that barrel and how you have to maintain that water to keep it clean, etc. So anyway, that's just, that's my bias on that, is I think barrels are less effective than grading, such that what runs off your roofs and hardscape in your landscape stays on your property.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've got a similar sort of question and issue that comes up with rain barrels in Colorado. It's a very similar statute, allows for 2 55-gallon barrels, and pretty much recognition across the board that it's mostly, and the Denver metro area gets 14 inches of rain a year on average. So recognition that oftentimes this is more of kind of educational tool, connecting folks to their water and making them more aware of it, but potentially not the most impactful measure here. But to your point,
anyway, no, I don't want to derail you. Sorry.
Well, I just wanted to say that potentially what we could focus on with the rainwater harvesting is more of that passive harvesting that you mentioned, and it sounds like Jeremy works on, those bioswales and rain garden design and figuring out ways to either incentivize, again, potentially through that landscape water budget, or require those more passive harvesting systems in some types of development.
Yeah,
And if we went that route, there could be an opportunity to, similar to gray water, include some of the best practices from a design perspective.
yeah, and that would also ease our stormwater situation at times. However, keep in mind, it's not, it happens here where we'll get 2 inches of rain in a half an hour. And
Yeah.
that's a whole nother side of what goes on here. Our rain comes in a way that harvesting it to put it in barrels to then water your landscape with it, or rely on your landscape to survive on it. If you're going to grow food of any kind, it's probably not always going to work so well.
Yeah.
But anyway, it doesn't mean it's not worth doing, but I do think that it needs to be realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just add very briefly that, Mike, you and I should chat sometime or take a walk around a couple different locations, because I think in context, water harvesting really makes a big difference. But for example, I would never build a bioswale without the incorporation of gray water into it as well. So I think it really needs to be in concord with other strategies, but it would be fun to talk to you more about it. But regardless, definitely support the concept as a general practice, and expanding that idea of what you just said, moving from the 50-gallon barrel to the, topographically shaped landscape as the way in which people interact with their systems, because those 50-gallon barrels don't really mean anything, in my opinion. They're just glorified watering cans that you can't actually use. But anyway, I think it's an important piece of the puzzle, but a piece of the puzzle. So thanks for including it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like we should connect with a few of you on this further as we start to think through specific recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving right along here. So that wraps up those sort of 12 not recommendations at this point, opportunities, options. I just wanted to list them out all here so you guys kind of had them accessible. But now we're going to move into some discussion. I'm looking at the time. Mila, are we able to use this remaining 15 minutes? Do we have till 4?
You'll need to ask Jeremy, but I do believe so.
Sorry, Jeremy.
Yep. Yeah, that's fine.
Is that all right? Okay.
Agenda allocated to this time. So.
Excellent. So I don't think we need to address these in any particular order. These are the same questions that we posed before walking through those recommendations. But, things that stand out to you that, and some of these I know we've already talked about as we've gone through, but things you'd like to see prioritized, things maybe necessarily for an updated landscaping code, anything that we're missing here that you'd like to see considered. And then this sort of getting at this question about having hard code requirements or including some of those softer recommended best practices in the code language. And, I think we talked about a few examples that have come up in other communities of where they've done each of these. So I will just open it up to the floor.
I've got one thing on my mind with all of this is I think, and the board's talked about this a few times, I think if the city comes up with a bunch of actual requirements, especially for residential areas, and especially if it's applied to not just new development, there's going to be a lot of pushback. And I think a really critical piece of all this, and I didn't see it in there, but it might just be implied in your presentation, is the idea of making sure that this is coupled with some really solid outreach, because I think you'll get more out of either recommended best practices or even requirements if people understand the why and they actually get inspired to do it instead of being told, oh, well, you have to do it. So, and I think, we've talked about this at length multiple times. We haven't really ever gotten very far with that, but I think it would be really nice to see whatever recommendations or requirements that you guys are suggesting the city adopt, paired with a very active outreach and education program as well, because I think that might get people farther, or might get the city farther to actually having things happen voluntarily than by requirement.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for that comment, Kara. And one thing that I meant to mention at the outset, but is a good point, is that most typically in a zoning code and the things that we're talking about would only apply to new development. Although you do see examples where communities are developing their landscaping standards in a way that will also apply to redevelopment, like if there's a significant retrofit happening in a landscape. So maybe that will help with a little bit of the potential pushback from the existing residential community.
I think the other thing that just is coming up a lot for us, and it is across the West, is also just the lack of moderate and affordable housing. And so I think the other thing is, if you add requirements that require the dual plumbing that's required for gray water, that requires an irrigation system, that might not be able to be just drip with, like it might overcomplicate things or make things cost more by requiring 4 cubic yards per 80 square feet of landscape of mulch or whatever. You're suddenly then inadvertently making it harder for a new project to be affordable. So I think that's another super important aspect of this that is kept in mind as those things are put into place. So I guess that's the other piece of that education component, because I think if people understand that by saving water, they're going to save some money, have less weeds, all kinds of other things, that can help too. So, because I think just a stick of this has to happen isn't helpful. And if it means we lose, I don't feel like it should be a choice between affordable housing and water conservation, but at the same time, it would suck if water conservation became something that, through landscaping stuff in particular, became something that then was yet another thing that could be cited as, well, this is why I can't build affordable housing. Anyway, that's I just think it's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that we need to be very cognizant of the upfront costs of any kind of modification to the landscaping code. And education is important too, as you mentioned, because, ideally, if this works, if we are able to develop something effective and that's implemented appropriately, you will see those back end savings, right, on your water bill, on your maintenance, on your fertilizers and other inputs. So kind of having that conversation and education with the community is likely going to be very important.
Just related.
I think I saw Eve's hand first. Sorry, so maybe I'll do a little bit of calling, and then I saw Steve and then Jeremy.
Thanks. I just briefly wanted to defer to Cara and Jeremy in particular, but I know they were only examples on your slides, but the idea of requiring 50% appropriate plants just doesn't seem effective to me, and also just the overly complicated idea of requiring 3 different species of trees. It seems to me like you want to have all the plants be appropriate and not just half the plants, but that's just my 2 cents, and maybe the others have a better answer for that.
And hey, Lindsay, could you stop sharing your screen so it's easier for us to see each other? Sorry, if we're into a discussion phase, thank you.
Thanks for that.
I can drop those discussion questions in the chat too, so you guys can reference them.
And just really quickly, Eve, when you're referring to the 50% appropriate plants, are you saying you think that 50% living plant material, like the first one we talked about, was overly, or 50% selected from a plant list of water-wise needed?
It seemed like at least one of the examples was, there was a lot coming at us there, but it seemed like it was an example where maybe I misunderstood it, but it seems like if there's a recommended, a required plant list seems like a better option to me, not just recommended. And also having a much higher percentage of plants from the list, not just half of them. Maybe you're right. Maybe it was 50% organic and 50% living or whatever. So
No, you got that right. That is what Sedona is doing, 50% native species from their plant list. So potentially
Yeah,
upping that or.
it
Well,
just
but-
seems like it
but-
defeats the purpose.
Well,
But Cara, yeah, go ahead.
except that honestly, 50% native plants that's actually pretty intense, because a lot of people, depending on what they want in their landscape, I mean, if you walk around my front yard, I don't have 50% native plants in my actual landscape, even though that's what I do for a living, is regenerate native plants out in the landscape, because that's not really I can't, like the plants that are my favorite, I can't grow because I have too much shade and too much mulch. So yeah, I think what you're hitting on is a important point, but it's a challenging one. And do we really want to go the native route or the drought tolerant route? And that's, I think, the question.
That makes more sense. If it's about water use, it doesn't matter if they're native, as long as they're not, invasive or something. But it's more about, it defeats the purpose if you only require half the plants to be drought tolerant. So anyway, just my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you. And Steve?
So for the final outcome, I think I'd rather see recommended practices rather than hard code requirements. I agree with Cara that if you had a list of good practices, and we would then educate the population on what is good and what it will save you as far as water, it'd be a lot more effective and better accepted.
Okay, thank you. And Jeremy?
Yeah, just in a sense, building on what Cara and Steve just said, for example, and I don't know if this is part of the research work that you do, but looking at incentivization, for example, I read this morning that in this federal bill that's coming through, if it goes through, there'll potentially be a $900, effectively a subsidy for anyone who buys an e-bike anywhere in the United States. And I don't know if there's something relevant to, native plant purchases or landscaping or gray water or anything like that, but capitalizing on that, I think would be a good tool in convincing people in rural anywhere who don't like to be convinced of anything to do something because it's actually a fiscal benefit to them. So even with, but also above and beyond education, incentivizing things financially, which I don't necessarily want to pull from the local community or cause that to be the burden on our shoulders. Wouldn't mind pulling it from tourism, but if it could come from the federal level, that would be fine as well. But understanding those connections better, because I think that's hard for where we are to know where those sources of money are coming from all the time, if that's something that your organizations do.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. That would be, it is something that our organizations do, and we've been tracking the infrastructure bill funding. Victoria works closely with communities on the Bureau of Reclamation's Water Smart grant. So we certainly have a lot of resources that we can share. It goes a bit beyond the scope of the Project Accelerator for us and sort of coming up with these standards and recommendations, but we certainly have a lot of information we can share, and through other parts of our organization's work, we may be able to work together on getting some federal funding support for the city.
Well, and not to build off of what Jeremy just said, if it's okay, is in California in the 70s when they had a pretty intensive drought, woman I used to work with was working for Department of Water Resources there and was initially tasked with trying to convince people to use low flow toilets and get, low flow shower heads. And she had more of a natural resources background. And she's like, that's not where the water loss is, it's in the landscape. So she actually convinced the state of California to fund certain neighborhoods, to fund a certain number of houses per street to swap out their lawns for, drought tolerant native landscapes. I'm not saying that should happen here necessarily, or could happen, but a thing that could be done is maybe something that the planning department or Mila or others could do is go into neighborhoods and take photographs of landscapes that exemplify low water use, to show the wide range of landscape you can have, so that people can maybe understand it's not just like, actually a gravel lot with a couple cactus might actually be using more water than the person a couple rows down who has something else going on. And maybe use that as a way of showing, highlighting some samples so that people could maybe think more creatively. I don't know if that's a great idea or not, but I think there might be a way without having to find money to highlight, hey, there's a lot of really good examples out there in the landscape.
Yeah, I love that idea, like a water-wise garden walking tour, something like that.
And even focusing on commercial, so that you're not like showing off people's private homes, but maybe going through and basically rating all of the existing commercial landscapes. Because like we just have a brand new hotel down the street from my house where it breaks almost all the rules that I saw you talking about, like turf being too narrow on a slope in a south direction that's never used. And so, not to shame people, but by the same token, to maybe analyze what's on the landscape now, to sort of then highlight, hey, these are some really good examples. And then maybe not to shame people, but to say, hey, this isn't the best solution for this space, and here's why.
Right. Thank you for that.
Just to add to that real quick, we have an effort going, sorry, my video is off, to try to maintain my internet. There's an effort that we are putting together to do a community, I don't even know what we're calling it, maybe an ecological block party, I guess, to get, a few different people on one block to get together and all switch over their landscapes to WaterWise. And so we're working with Jeff and Roz and a few other folks, actually August Travel Council, a lot of folks to get that to happen. So hopefully there will be some good examples by the end of the spring in town of people that are doing that in more of a public way.
That's great. Thanks, Mila. So I see that we are at the end of our time together. But Victoria, do you want to share screen real quick, and we can just put our contact information up, as we're more than happy to talk to anyone who has additional thoughts. And we also wanted to just mention that, this isn't the last time we'll be talking with you all about this project. Once we've gotten further down the road on actually developing some of these recommendations and not just the examples of what could be done, we'll be bringing back that draft updated landscaping code to this body and asking for your input, before it goes to council for the adoption process. So these are our emails here, if you'd like to reach out to us about that, if you'd like to talk more. And I think with that, I'd just like to thank you all for having us today, and for your time, and for all of your engagement and insight on this issue. This is a group with a lot of expertise in this area, and we just really appreciate your support and all of your thinking on this.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Lindsey said. Thank you all so much for your time today and for inviting us to join your meeting. And we really look forward to continuing the conversation and talking with you all as we start to develop these recommendations.
Thank you both for coming. I'm sure I reflect the sentiment of the board, but others feel free to speak up as well. I'm happy to continue engaging in any ways that make most sense moving into the new year. So we'll stay in touch, and I'm sure we can send around that contact information in our meeting minutes. Okay. If anyone has anything else they'd like to add, please feel free to. Otherwise, we'll bring the meeting to a close as we're just past 4 o'clock. Nope. Okay, I'll call the meeting at 4.